Hey, welcome to the channel in the next installment of the FE number 1 build series. This video was getting a little long, so I decided to break it up into two pieces. And what I'm doing here is getting it rolled over and getting it ready to put the oil pan timing cover and get the pickup installed. And there were some details I felt like I needed to mention on this pickup setup, so I went ahead and talked about them. And what I got here is the bolt that's replacing our stud that has the little stud made in the top of the bolt to hold that pickup tube. You really have to support that rear sump pickup tube or it can actually shake and break off. And of course, if it breaks off, you lose oil pressure and there goes your engine. So here I am taking the stud out. I couldn't find anybody that had a stud in stock with both size studs on the nut side. Something to keep in mind when you do this is you need to break the stud loose on the other side, put the new bolt in, and then retorque both sides of the cap. That way it keeps it square. So I did a little checking, checked a few other references, and decided to set both of them at 110. Now, the reason I feel pretty comfortable doing this, it's on the thrust main, so that piece of the crankshaft and that main cap's actually supported in two different directions, both vertically and horizontally.
So now it's time to play wheel-o pickup again. Now what we want to do is get 3/8 of an inch of clearance between this, which is your pickup box, and the bottom of the oil pan. So we're going to have to do a couple of test fittings. Now when you're test fitting this, there's a couple of things you need to keep in mind. One is your gasket's going to squish a little, and that 3/8 is a ballpark figure. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and set the gasket on here, but you got to be careful while you're doing this and remember that the front's hanging over the edge. This is a one-piece gasket, and it's only one piece one time, and you don't want to mess it up if you don't have to. So you want to try to get it on and get it sealed, because this is as good as it gets. Now there's a little bit of play in this tube, so that'll let us get lined up, and then we're going to clay this. And I'm not kidding when I said clay it. I just used this. Nobody's sponsoring this video like usual. I just like to use this one. It's like $3 at the local hobby store. Hobby Town, various places have it. Hobby Lobby. I think I actually got this one in Hobby Lobby. So I finally used up my old pack that I'd had for like 10 years. So just get some good non-hardening clay. I just bought the blue because it's what they had. Alright, so you can take a piece of aluminum foil or a piece of wax paper, whichever the case may be. Put it over your screen. That keeps you from getting clay down inside of your pickup. I usually like to give it a little squeeze to make sure it stays in place. I usually just kind of peel it back like a gum wrapper. It's got oil in it. And you just want to cut you off a little piece. Okay, and we want to get it nice and soft and just play with it like you did, and as you can see, it's turning my hands blue. And it's not going to be happy with just one bolt on this one. Now, this is a Canton double hump oil pan for an FE motor. This is a nice piece. It's very heavy. And oil pans is one of those few places where heavy's good. You don't want it excessively heavy, but you don't want it not heavy enough. And you just want to push down lightly and let it set for a second. As you can see, the corrugations in the bottom of the pan, this helps with oil canning, keeps the bottom of the pan stiff, and keeps the oil pump from sucking the bottom of the pan up and blocking off the pickup. It's something to look for in a quality oil pan. The factory ones are always small at the bottom and stamped around it to do that job. Okay, so after claying it and measuring our clay, we find that we're better than 3/4 of an inch thick, so we got to do something. Well, there's play built into these holes on these bolts, so we're going to lift this up, close the gap between the bottom of the pan. Now what we also have to watch, and if you notice, this tube is quite a bit bigger than the hole in the oil pump, and that's to allow this to work. So I'm going to put a stack of hardened washers under this, raise it up, and then we'll reclay the pan. Now why clay? Because it's the easiest way to do this. This is one of those time-consuming parts of engine building. After a while, you kind of get to where you can look at it and tell that, hey, I need to add a little bit to that. And it usually comes down to when this tube is level. But not always, because you know things happen in manufacturing, and this plate could have got put on a little off. And as you can see, it's got a really good size hole in there. So we put that on. We drop this on. I'm just going to put the top bolt in this time and tighten it up because we know what we're dealing with more or less now. And this is one of those little things where you just take your time. It can make all the difference in the world in this thing oiling correctly. So you bend your clay up again and get it warm so it's soft. Take my little clay ball, put it back in the middle of my pickup. Hopefully I hit clay before I hit metal this time, and I did. So see, it's rocking on the clay, and you just go ahead and give it a nice push. Let it set for a minute. Alright, now this time you're going to have a little more traction coming up, and the clay may come with the pan, which it did. And as you can see, it's down in there, and I got to carefully get that out. There. You just push gently, and this is much better. This is closer to 3/8. So then we go back to the caliper, and we're sitting at a thick of 427. So 0.375 is 3/8, and a ½ inch is 500, so we actually want to come down a little more. I prefer to be closer to the 3/8 side than the ½ inch side. But the other thing we have to keep in mind is, will our fiber lock nut engage our stud? We're kind of starting to run out of fiber. Now, we can put some Loctite on that and accomplish the same thing. Some people put the nut on upside down and let the fiber go to the bottom. I don't like to do that because it can spread on you and you only got 2 threads holding this thing. And this is what's keeping your engine alive. And another thing we're going to do is get this sticker off here before we put this dipstick in, because you don't want that cooking off and blocking up the hole. And I know if you've built an engine before, this is kind of rudimentary stuff, but for people that's never done it or put a non-factory pickup on, this is good information. I may have done that claying trick over when I did the oil pan swap on the 351 to put the Fox pan on the older style engine. So I'm going to go ahead and get my gasket out of the way so that no harm comes to it. I'm going to have to go to a regular nut, as much as I would prefer to use the fiber lock nut, but it just worked out that way this time. Alright, so a lot of people will tell you to put some sealer on this gasket when you put it in here. And you want to use the gasket that most closely matches. Because what's going to happen is this is what's going to seal the hole. And if you notice, this has got a big flat spot on it. That big flat spot's what's doing the sealing. You want this hole to stay centered on this oil pump because you don't want to lose any more of this suction orifice than you absolutely positively have to, because this is the heart of your engine. The oil pump quits working or this pickup gets blocked, you're done. It don't matter how careful you've been, what you've done, how powerful it is or ain't. It's gonna kill it, plain and simple. I always use the thick one out of the Felpro kit or the super thin one that comes in the melon kit. In this case, because we're going rear sump and I got to move it around some, that thin one can tear if it gets caught on a little snag. Now I've run my finger around and I don't feel any snags, any burrs. Everything's nice and smooth. It's already nice and stoned, and by stoned you take a machine file. You don't want to do it on your pump because you don't want to get shavings in your oil pump unless you're taking it completely apart and doing support work on it and all that. And we'll talk about that in another video at another time. Okay, so the easy way to do this is to trap the gasket with the first bolt. Gravity will hold the other one down. Get it started like a thread and a half, 2 threads, because you need room for it to wiggle. Then you go ahead and get the next one started. This is going to seem a little silly, but there's method to the madness. This works a little easier with a little ratchet, but this wrench was handy, so that's what we're using. Now, you back this out. Give it a drop of Loctite, or in this case a little straight, because we want to make sure these don't come loose. We know that this is at the depth we need it at, so that's not a problem. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to tighten this bolt up because the gasket's not going to move. Gravity's holding this down. We're going to give it a good tug. And we're going to break the bottom one back out, being real careful not to do something horrible like drop it in the engine. And remember, when you're doing this, if you drop the bolt, it usually ends up trapped behind a cam lobe or down in a piston. If it's down in the piston, it's easy. Just reach in there with a magnet and fish it out. It gets trapped behind a cam lobe, you usually end up doing some disassembling. Okay, so we don't have enough room to put a lock washer on it. We can't take a washer out because we need this to line up with where it needs to go in the engine. So I'm going to put 2 dots of red in here. We're going to run her on down. We've already torqued the mains. Now yes, this would be better with a stud here, but nobody seemed to have one, so we're going to go this route. I've done this on a couple other engines. It's been okay. This is the first time doing it to an FE. We'll find out. So now we're ready to get the timing cover on, and while that's drying and loosely snug, which we're going to try to level it up with the top of the block, we'll show that in a second. Then we'll get the oil pan on and the bottom's buttoned up, and we're ready to move on to the top, and we're almost done building this engine.